There you go.
How exciting. Okay, so I am going to just make sure everybody's muted. Perfect. I am really excited about this topic as I share it inside of my hotel room in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm here for leadership conference in Green Compass. Sorry, let me get comfortable. So sorry about the background, it's a little bit different, but for those of you guys who are watching on the Facebook, whether or not you're watching it live or in replay, please say hi and tag the person that invited you to this wellness group so we can make sure that we know that you watched. And if you have any questions, I love this topic. So please ask away. I am not here to give you per se a history lesson today, but what I do want to do is give you some thoughts and ideas about some of the timeline of the illegalization of marijuana and how it revolves around hemp more so than it revolves around pot. There's a lot of weird terms that we talk about it, and pot, cannabis, weed, all of these things. As you start to learn about it, if you're interested in this topic, you will actually see that those terms are very specifically created for you to look negatively at the topic. It's a very interesting thought process that has created bias in our lives.
Chrissy sound. Yeah.
You just went all staticky.
What if I do that? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So when you realize that the bias that has been created is there intentionally to because of propaganda, you might be able to start recognizing the fears, the unnecessary fears that evolve around cannabis. And hopefully this sparks an idea, a thought, a desire to even look at marijuana differently, not just CBD, because obviously our company is a hemp-based wellness company. But I challenge you to think about the plant as a whole, and think about the beauty that it actually encompasses, because I believe firmly that we are on this earth with all of the plants that we need to help heal, help cure. Yes, there are plants out there that can harm. If anybody's a gardener out there, you know about belladonna. You know that that is a very dangerous plant to have in your garden because it lowers your heart rate. Well, it serves a purpose though, because cardiac patients use that same synthetic version of belladonna in the form of digoxin. So it's we just have to respect that nature exists and that there are reasons why plants exist on this planet. And I have always believed that there should not be a law that creates any plant to be legal or illegal. It doesn't make sense to me. It's never made sense to me. I actually wrote a paper about this in my undergraduate class in 2005 when I started out in my nursing program. So anyway, that is my little soapbox. I'm going to share with you some ideas and topics, and hopefully I sparked some creativity in your mind to look more at this idea and to recognize your own personal bias, your own fears, and realize that this plant is freaking phenomenal. Hi, Nicolette. Thanks for joining. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this works. I do want to show you a tool that you will be able to use later if you so choose. You can print it. We've got a couple of people in the waiting room, Kathy and Kathy. Oh, we got two Kathys joining. How exciting. So let me go into the presentation first. We'll talk about all of these fun facts and come on, Wi-Fi. See what I can close out to make this Wi-Fi work. Sorry, I'm working on my hotel Wi-Fi, free, by the way. Good luck. Good luck. All right, participants can now see my screen. Everybody can see that now? I hope so. I'm waiting on it to load and tell me I can present. Oh, please.
Can you mute everyone?
There's some feedback. I don't know where it's coming from.
All right. We just gonna have a little time delay.
Hey, Chrissy.
All right, hopefully this isn't too slow for you guys and you guys can see all this. So we are talking about the history of hemp in a nutshell. What I want you to think about when it comes to hemp and marijuana is that they're actually sisters. Can you see? What's the matter, Sherry?
Chrissy.
You can't hear us. Can you hear us?
No, I cannot hear you now.
You need to mute everybody.
Happening? Hold please. Hold please.
Do you see the chat? Do you see the chat?
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. My microphone acts like it's moving, but now I can't hear you guys.
Look at the chat. Look at the chat.
To write? No, I don't want you to write.
Look at the chat.
Oh, I hear you.
Look at the chat. Okay, there's an echo. All right. It went away.
The echo went away or only when I talk?
No, it's good now.
Okay, super weird. Yeah, when I share my screen, I can't see the chat, but I'll watch out for it again. And then Sherry, you're right.
I'll do this.
Yeah, you're right underneath me, so do that for me. So we're going to talk about the history of hemp, and when we talk about this, it's a very interesting parallel that takes place. I kind of look at it like the two sisters, hemp and marijuana. And even though we think that marijuana is the evil sister that people were out to go get, it's actually not the case. They were after hemp. And that is why marijuana was listed as a Schedule 1, as cannabis in general, is that it didn't really have anything to do with marijuana. It has a little bit to do with it with some of the players involved, but a lot of it had to do with hemp, and we'll talk about why in just a minute. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Chrissy Etheridge. I'm a nurse practitioner. I work predominantly in 4 different ERs in Las Vegas, Nevada, but I'm also just avidly passionate about plant-based wellness and teaching people how to use plants first instead of pills. Even though I do, make a living at, in the emergency room, I do, first of all, I use plants first in my entire family and myself. So it's become a new passion of mine. I've been in healthcare for 17 years, and hopefully the next 2 decades will be revolved around helping people get off of all of the westernized medicine that we think that we need right now. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. Yes, I'm in a hotel room for those of you that just logged on. I'm traveling for leadership for Green Compass this weekend. So I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, instead of Las Vegas, Nevada. So I'm going to try to stay awake and not act silly during this whole thing. So I want you to think about this for just a minute. You plant the seed, and roughly 3 months later, you have food, fiber for housing and clothing. You have oil that could replace petroleum, run your car. You can eat that oil. It's safe enough to eat, run on your car, and it's high in omega-3s and omega-6s. So it's technically a superfood. And we're actually talking about hemp right now. So how ironic that we just had to wait until 2018 for a farm bill to pass that legalized hemp again, and all of the blessings that come along with what hemp can actually afford in eliminating deforestation, possibly dealing with some of our energy crisis, helping us not have to cut down all of these trees in order to provide paper, maybe even running our cars on the hemp petroleum that Henry Ford created. We'll talk about this in just a minute. So just kind of open your minds just a little bit and realize this is a really cool plant. This is what we're going to talk about. This presentation, you guys, I'll have it available somehow for you guys to go back and look at. So certainly there's no quizzes. Again, this isn't a history lesson. I just want to open your mind a little bit. Okay. So hemp is without a doubt the most fascinating plant known to man. There's virtually nothing that can't be made out of hemp. Almost everything in your house, from your curtains, tables, chairs, and furniture, can be made entirely of this plant. You can also make fiberboard, hemp concrete, hemp insulation, and hemp carpet. Nearly every aspect of your house could be made from hemp. And our founding fathers knew this. Thomas Jefferson said hemp is one of the greatest, most important crops of our nation. Early lawmakers were well aware of this plant's potential, yet they didn't even fully grasp how incredible it actually was. Yet for some seemingly bizarre reason, in the 20th century, cannabis went under intense scrutiny and public resentment. Now, I want you to think about this for just a minute. When I talk about this plant, I talk about cannabis. You'll uncover in just a minute, marijuana is a negative term. It was created as a negative connotation referencing the Mexican population. If you think about Mary and Juana, it's actually Mary Jane. So just think about that for a minute. It's a negative connotation when we refer back to marijuana. So I talk about it as cannabis because it's a cannabis species. And this is, I want to start like uncovering that cannabis propaganda and bias that we all have. So anyway, so if one is to really question the motives behind hemp and cannabis propaganda, I'll find that nothing is bizarre at all. In fact, it makes perfect sense. All you need to do is follow the money. And this is what I want you to think about with our founding fathers, not the Thomas Jefferson people, but the Rockefellers, the Hearst, the Mellons, the England, the DuPont family. I want you to start thinking about how they shaped our history in the beginning of the 20th century to fund their families, right? So first of all, we need to talk about the Hemp Decorticator. And I know you're like, wait a minute, I thought we were going to talk about these big money people, but we need to really realize that in the early 1900s, we had a German-American inventor. I don't want to mess up his name. I'm going to call it Schlitzen. He actually invented this hemp decorticator. But he didn't get credit for it, which is kind of interesting. But this created a lot of fear, and I'll show you why. The hemp plant right here on the right needs to be separated. The outer fiber of the hemp stalk and the inner wood have completely different purposes. The outer fiber of the stalk is what's used to make the clothing, the fabric, the ropes, things like that. The inner stalk is what can make wood for construction. And prior to the decorticator being invented, there wasn't an easy way for hemp to be separated. Okay. When this decorticator was invented, this really started threatening the likes of some of these big money guys because they knew that this could really change the face of hemp and its uses, because now it could be mass grown and also mass harvested using this tool. So let's talk about a couple of the money people. So John D Rockefeller, I'm sure you've heard of him. Many powerful bankers at the time, like Rockefeller, had a lot at stake. He was a financier of the pharmaceutical industry and probably saw cannabis as a threat. On top of that, he was an owner of the Standard Oil Company. He passed away only 4 years before Henry Ford invented the soybean car, which ran on hemp fuel. And it's likely a smart businessman like him was aware of the threat that the decorticator and cannabis posed to his family's wealth, right? Because if he owned the Standard Oil Company and hemp could actually create petroleum, obviously there's a conflict of interest there, and he wanted to knock that out of commission. William R Hearst plays a role in this too. Might be a name you're familiar with. He's an American newspaper publisher who built the nation's largest newspaper chain and whose methods profoundly influenced American journalism. The invention of the decorticator was a real threat to him and other financial giants of the time because the low-cost hemp could be substituted for paper pulp. This is a big deal, guys. Like, we need to kind of see where everybody's money, their wallets were lined. So when his mother dies in 1919, in the worldwide influenza epidemic, she willed the vast majority of her holdings to him. And by the 1930s, he owned millions of acres of timber forest. This is not coincidence. So talking about Hearst continuing, following a Hollywood drug scandal in 1921, the newspapers published by Hearst Company, launched what became an annual crusade against narcotics with a hyperbolic and tear-jerking account by star reporter sob sister Winifred Black. She wrote under the name of Annie Laurel. And in addition to this crusade against narcotics in general, he was also not a friend of minorities or cannabis users. And he hated cannabis so much that he authored the iconic Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 that later was replaced by the Controlled Substance Act of 1970. So what's interesting about this, let's see if I can find it, this Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, I don't have this in the article, but when I was writing my paper in 2005, even so, this was very well known that prior to the Tax Act being created, and really what it did was it required people to pay a tax on having, prior to 1937, physicians could prescribe marijuana to their patients. This Tax Act required that each person that actually had a bottle had paid a tax on it, but they were creating, every state started illegalizing marijuana. And so anybody that went to ask for a tax stamp so they could pay the tax on the marijuana they had could actually be arrested. So it was this horrible, stupid loophole that took place in this time. But what's interesting about the Tax Act prior to, and this is really what my paper was about in 2005 that I wrote, was the fact that the American Medical Association, who had been prescribing marijuana prior to this Tax Act, actually got up on stage and said, we don't want marijuana to be listed as a Schedule I because we still think that there's things that can be used, marijuana can be used for. And they said basically to him, if you're not going to say what we want you to say, then get off the stand. That's actually in the transcripts of this court date or in this trial. It's insane, the cover-ups that took place. So anyway, my conspiracy brain just keeps rolling. So let's talk about Andrew Mellon for a little bit. This one I didn't really know about, but he was the U.S. Treasurer or U.S. Secretary of Treasury from 1921 to 1932. And he was heavily invested in the DuPont Company's invention of nylon. Now, if anybody's ever heard me talk about this, I always connect hemp and nylon together. And this was really an interesting concept. So hemp could have easily replaced nylon in these early times. Somebody is talking. Does that mean I've lost the ability? Oh yeah. Oh yeah, Jill. Fires me up too, girl. I can get this. This could be a topic for days. So from his position of influence, remember he's the U.S. Secretary of Treasury, Mellon appoints his son-in-law, Harry Anslinger, who we mentioned above, and we'll mention again, to the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. These aren't coincidences. I'm getting chill bumps. You guys really need to understand the bias that were created and why people still today are scared of using hemp and CBD and marijuana. This was your influence right here. And it was passed on from generations to generations. So Anslinger, let's talk about him for just a minute. This guy that we just talked about a minute ago, that was the son-in-law that was of Mellon's, that is now the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, right? So he was so racist. It's not even funny to talk about, like when you read some of the stuff that he says. And cannabis was very popular in blues and jazz musicians in that whole group in the 1910s, 1920s. And this is from Anslinger himself, quote, marijuana is mostly used by Blacks, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz, results from marijuana use. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with the Blacks, the entertainers, and any others. You know, it gets better, because if you haven't watched Reefer Madness, I want you to write this down and I want you to Google it, because it wasn't long until the use of marijuana was equivalent to sin, promiscuity, and even brutality. So much so where if you watch Reefer Madness, this is a film that was put out in the 1930s that basically said that the minute that a man of some kind of Black, Hispanic, or Filipino descent smokes marijuana, he goes around and rapes and pillages all the white women. Crazy, right? Propaganda. This is where marijuana starts to be called marijuana, because the association to the Hispanic population, and Reefer Madness really portrays a lot of the Mexican men running around raping women after smoking pot. Now, I don't know if you guys know any people that consume marijuana, but they're actually pretty relaxed human beings. And I've never seen anybody running around raping people that have ever smoked pot before, ever. Just think about the 70s and hippie, peace, love, and all that fun stuff. Anyway, okay, I'm breathing. So now we got to move on to the DuPont family. So the DuPont company had invented cellophane, which was a type of plastic made with petroleum. It's all related, okay? This was about to become the standard packaging for most American goods. They had also just invented nylon, which is a revolutionary carbon-based product that came from the chemicals found in petroleum, okay? Hemp fiber, however, was the first plastic to be made with plant oils that could be a competition for DuPont's products. I hope you guys are tying this together. This is Reefer Madness. I just really challenge you to look this up. It's really bizarre. It was originally financed by a church under the group, under the title Tell Your Children. It was a 1936 US propaganda movie that depicted young people immediately addicted, violent, and crazy after consuming cannabis. With its almost comical exaggerations and misconceptions, the film is a historic testimony of the fear-mongering of that era. But an interesting thing takes place. So we've got all these things happening in the 1930s. They're building a case against really saying, marijuana is bad. They've got the tax law now in place. They've got a lot of things happening. However, US realizes that they need help. They need help in World War II, and they need more hemp. And so they reverse its stance in 1942 when they realize that they need hemp for the war effort. And so the Department of Agriculture started to heavily promote hemp and publish various benefits that hemp offered. Check this out. Hemp produces 4 times more pulp per acre than trees, more paper than trees. We could eliminate deforestation by growing hemp farms. It's insane to think about this. I need you guys to really get on board with this. If you know representatives in, different legal arenas, or, your congressman or your senator or whatever, we really need to get this whole cannabis species, not just CBD, off of, all of these negative connotations. Honestly, this is just, we could change so many different environmental issues, not only health, but environmental. It's insane. So the peak of hemp production, when the US government released its pro-hemp documentary, it's called Hemp for Victory. You can look it up. I do have a bit.ly link, bit.ly /hemp for victory. You can go check that video out as well. And this actually led to 400,000 acres of hemp being planted during 1942 to 1945. Really, really cool. Now, we kind of move forward because after World War II, the efforts go back. We do have, the Marijuana Tax Act that was passed. That never left. We certainly have the first marijuana sellers convicted in 1937 and actually arrested for selling marijuana. We continue to have these issues. Marijuana was removed from the US Pharmacopedia in 1942. Then we start publicizing, like from LaGuardia, that marijuana was actually less dangerous than thought. However, we still have these pushes for prison sentences, because remember, we've got the Angslingers, we've got the Hearst, we've got the Rockefellers, we've got all these influences that still know that they need to control the petroleum, the oil, and the actual tree productions. This never stops to happen until in 2014, and there's some very interesting things that happened earlier than 2014, and I have a timeline that I'll share with you in a minute. But somewhere in the early 2000s, 2008, 2009, the American Medical Association actually steps forward and says, marijuana actually has medical purposes. Oh, it doesn't work, Jill. Maybe you could just Google Hemp for Victory and see, because maybe I messed up the bit.ly. So the American Medical Association steps forward. If you're not familiar with the scheduling, the drug scheduling, there's a drug schedule for all prescription drugs that could have addiction possibility or dependency possibility. I, as a nurse practitioner, have to have a DEA license in order to prescribe Schedule 2 3, 4, and 5 drugs. Well, I have to, you know, I mean, just being a nurse practitioner, I can prescribe all drugs, but if they're listed under these schedules, I have to ask very specifically to the DEA for a license that's tracked by all pharmaceutical companies when I write prescriptions. Schedule 2, for example, would be Percocet, Norco, Xanax. We've got, I believe, Adderall is a Schedule 3. You've got some barbiturates that are 4s and 5s. So you could look up the drug classes. Schedule 1, however, is a very specific, nobody can prescribe Schedule 1. I say that. We can actually use cocaine for the eyes in the ER, and that is actually technically a Schedule 1, but it can't be prescribed outpatient. It can only be used for procedures. But Schedule 1, they actually say that is listed that there's no medicinal benefit and it's highly addictive. And marijuana has been on that Schedule 1 since the 1940s. In 2008, the American Medical Association stepped forward and said, guys, this isn't the case anymore. We know that there's benefits from marijuana. We know that patients with seizures can benefit from it. We know that patients with Parkinson's can benefit from it. There's so many different neurological issues. We've been giving synthetic CBD called Marinol since I was a nurse in the ICU in the 2005-6 to help stimulate appetite for patients that didn't want to eat, like if they were in chemo and things like that. So anyway, 2014, Barack Obama signs the 2014 Farm Bill. Now this does separate hemp and cannabis distinctly from marijuana. And so it allows the United States to start researching and piloting hemp farming research programs. And this is what's really interesting about Green Compass, the company that we are all representing and talking about and trying to help, help educate to use. They participated in this hemp pilot research program before they created their Green Compass in February 2019, I believe is when they started it. But they participated in these research pilot programs. In 2018, expanding on President Barack Obama's bill, Donald Trump signs the 2018 Farm Bill, which once again federally legalizes hemp production in the United States. Now it's called a Farm Bill. Now you understand the difference between, like when we talk about the uses of farming hemp, it still has a separate cannabis and hemp, marijuana and hemp. Marijuana is still on Schedule 1, guys. And this is one thing that has to be changed. It has to be for the simple fact that there are proven things that are coming out with marijuana and its uses. The seizures, the Parkinson's, I've seen so many different just videos of watching somebody with essential tremors use CBD or marijuana and it stops. Anyway, this is my opinion, you guys. I'm just here to educate, but this really, really needs to happen. And I just wanted to show you the legalization map state by state right now. This is 2022. All of the grays are legalized. So that means that in this state now, marijuana is still illegal on the federal level. Each state by state right now is starting to regulate its own marijuana laws. All the states in gray are now legalized. You can walk into any dispensary, such as the state I live in Nevada, and get a receipt for your marijuana. You can get recommended from what's called bud tenders to give you recommendations for marijuana or CBD. If you are decriminalized, then that means that if you have less than an ounce of marijuana on you, somebody's not muted. If you have less than an ounce on your possession, you will not go to jail. You will receive a fine, but you will not go to jail. There are some states that have passed medical only, which means that you do need to get a medical card. What's interesting about nurse practitioners is that we can't write those medical cards. There's just so much shit built up into this, and this really infuriates me because this plant helps so many different, the two sister plants, I talked about this earlier, marijuana and hemp, they actually heal people. I know this probably isn't FDA compliant, but I don't care right now. This has to be said. And then illegal. I am sitting in North Carolina, so it's decriminalized, but just below me in South Carolina and the state that I'm from, Tennessee, it is still illegal. If you are found to have marijuana on your possession, you could go to jail. And I'm not just talking about the big drug dealers. I want you to realize that in these states that haven't yet converted, they're actually using a lot of these simple possessions to keep people in the system, to keep probation fines going, to keep funding these small town counties that are using marijuana, and the fines and the tickets and the probation and all of the shit that comes along with these simple possessions. They're using this to fund the state. So anyway, on the flip side, those people that have, those states that have realized that marijuana is not criminal at all, are actually taxing. You get a sin tax just like you would for tobacco or alcohol, and they're now funding, different plans. I know Nevada uses their marijuana tax to help fund kids to go to college after they graduate. Every kid in Nevada gets free 2 years of college if they go right out of high school to college. So we can do the right thing by making sure that we understand where our bias come from. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen real quick and I'll stop recording in just a second. If we're open to really learning where the history of all of this happened, why it happened, how it happened, and then start educating. Because like I always say, when you know better, you do better. When you do better, you teach better. And this is one of those topics that has to be talked about all the time to really help people uncover the fear that is so unnecessary. People are losing their jobs over this. They might not be able to get into school programs if they test positive for THC, even CBD still. I was just talking to a nurse, a friend of mine. We've been friends forever. She works in the school system in Tennessee where it's still illegal. And she has been threatened by her bosses that if they're found to even be using CBD, they will be terminated immediately. Why? It makes no sense to me. So anyway, yeah, if you guys know anybody that's actually in any type of government, please start sending letters to them about this. This marijuana needs to come off Schedule 1, and it needs to be federally legal for both plants, hands down, so we can do research. Thank you so much, Sherry, for that. Okay, I'm going to stop recording.